Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is another In Conversation for FOFS 2020 in partnership and presentation with CBC. Today, we have Alicia Eisen, director of Deady Freddy. How are you today?
I'm great. The sun came out. It was raining so hard last night. It woke me up. So I'm great.
Well, I was really glad to actually be able to see your past work. Even diving into your Vimeo page and being able to see the wonderful surprises of your work in Moral, Oral, and Robot Chicken.
Yes.
It threw me for a loop. I was just, oh my God, this is fantastic. I guess because I'm just mostly curious, but if you can just bring us through an anecdote of essentially your history with stop motion animation and the intro, because I imagine living in Vancouver, there's a lot of access to post houses and sort of that kind of work. So if you could just bring us through the process of finding footing in there, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm from Toronto originally, and I had always wanted to be a sculptor growing up. And I read a magazine once that said to be a sculptor for visual effects, which is what I wanted to be, you had to go to animation school. Mm-hmm. So I did that. I went to Seneca College in Toronto. And then I decided I wanted to be a sculptor for stop motion. Like one of my favorite films ever was Nightmare Before Christmas. Mm-hmm. So when I graduated, I was fortunate to actually get a job in animation at Cup of Coffee in Toronto. And my plan was to just work my way into the puppet department. But after my first contract, I volunteered in the puppet department. And in doing that work, my heart literally ached for animating. Once I was doing that, there was something just so special about, because I've always loved to work with my hands, and that's what kind of led me to sculpting. But the ability to express yourself artistically on this level of movement through touch in a medium that ultimately still to this day feels magical for me was, nothing can compete with that. So I kind of realized that I was completely in love with stop motion animation. And really that's, where everything started for me. After working at Cup of Coffee for a while, the industry had died down in Toronto significantly, and that's when I was able to actually get a job in New York, being an animation supervisor on a stop motion portion of a corporate documentary for Heineken, which was great because I met a ton of new people, and we basically built a studio from nothing to make that project, and it was such an incredible experience. And that was kind of my first taste of working on a small team that, although it was for Heineken, it felt very indie because of just the local artists that were working on it. A lot of them had not worked in stop motion before, and it was just a great collaborative effort. And then after that, I was able to work in LA, of course, on the Before Oral special, which I was then introduced to the Robot Chicken people, which was fantastic. And at that time, my partner had moved to Vancouver from Toronto because he works in visual effects. So after working in the States for a while, I wanted to come back to Canada. And this was a very natural fit, seeing as it was a lot closer to LA also than Toronto. So that's kind of how I landed in Vancouver. Once I did land here, I felt a need to take a bit more control over my life and where I was living. And I had been going contract to contract, city to city a little bit, and it had really worn on me. In that time in Vancouver, actually, I was offered a job on a Henry Selick stop motion Disney feature in San Francisco, which I took, which I had to turn down an offer to work on the Charlie Kaufman Anomalisa in LA. However, when I got to San Francisco, that production was shut down by Disney. So for me, that was a bit the last straw of putting my fate into other people's hands. And I kind of just decided, I thought working with Disney was kind of a sure thing. It was a safe choice. In fact, it ended up being a bit of a risk that I lost out on. And I just decided if I was going to take another risk, I was going to take it on myself and my own work. Mm-hmm. And that's when I decided to just kind of like stay put in Vancouver and focus all of my creative energy into creating my own work and seeing what doors might open or what, new avenues might open that I hadn't considered. Mm-hmm. And that was really the impetus behind making my first film, Old Man.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, excellent way to transition into your work, because I mean, overall, I mean, with Old Man and now with Deady Freddy, I mean, there's, at least for those two projects that are purely stop motion and have very similar aesthetics running through them, I guess the conversation turns primarily to death.
Yeah, you're right.
But like not just the sort of like death as a concept. Like what I've written down is like what I'm curious mostly is is about your relationship with death, and why the specific way you position it is always as this sort of very deep but also very estranged existential concern. Like your characters are always observing the experience that leads toward their demise.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. To be honest, so I look at, life, birth, life, and death as the ultimate metaphor of storytelling. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's something that permeates my every experience in life. It's something I'm hyper aware of, and is literally just a metaphor for any experience that has a beginning, middle, and end, working in stop motion lends itself to a certain personality, which is to say an introvert, okay. Someone who's thinking a lot by themselves. And, where Old Man came from was just a persistent, intrusive thought about, what would it look like to allow fear to run your life and make your choices for you, and what would it matter in the end anyways, sort of. And I just, had this thought about one day confronting fear, because in the time when I thought of that film, I was like quite a bit younger and was very unsure about which direction to go with my life, and everything felt like a gigantic risk that wasn't worth taking. So when it came time for me to make my film, that's the story I went with, also because I just visually just saw this old man, with his back to the water and a huge wave coming to get him. It's kind of like, face your fears, or, I mean, they're there anyways. They're not going anywhere, And once I finished making that film, I was terrified that I was out of stories to tell. And what's really interesting, and the most important thing that I learned about myself, is that I'm full of stories and I don't even know it, because when I was looking to write a new film, I turned inwards and just kind of looked at my own obsessive thoughts that I always have. Mm-hmm. And I had this awful like daymare fantasy of not ever knowing truly what was right or wrong, and that, something that I didn't think that much about, which is killing a bug, which is like gross, but didn't mm-hmm. send me into like a moral tailspin. Like, how is that different than any other kind of murder? Like, I'm a vegetarian for ethical reasons, but I wear leather shoes and I kill bugs. So what is life, right? Mm-hmm. So it was just this obsessive thought that I realized is where I really made the connection between like art and my own like strange psychosis. Is like, it's actually the only cure for my obsessive thoughts, mm-hmm. is to make a film about it, break that film apart into 1/12 of a second and live it at that pace for a few years, and then I can be unburdened with those thoughts.
No, I imagine the incredibly laborious tactile process that is making of your films, and essentially, if these are works of, of a sort of catharsis,
Yes.
that like I'm sure the therapeutic process of production comes itself with its demons and angels.
Yes.
Um, I'd then I guess sticking with that idea, specifically, I'd like to ask you about the aesthetic design, because something that, I mean, in relation to like the subject matter of your work, um, how I think I could describe the aesthetic is that the characters themselves appear as though they could be pulled apart by a loose string. And how related that is, like, innately to the stories that they're going through. So I'm curious just on the decision to keep with the consistency of this character design and this aesthetic.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. I have a pretty specific approach when it comes to the sort of overall production design of my work, which is to say that I'm never trying to fool anyone that this is a live action film. And I feel like, I worked a lot in TV, and it's, there's a lot of very common fabrication processes that, seek to obtain a sort of seamless aesthetic or a very polished aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm a super tactile person. I love materials. If I'm walking down a street, my hands are out to touch the fences and the walls. I don't even know I'm doing it. It's just sort of who I am. So when I'm making anything, literally anything, art, visual, I'm drawn to the textures of things, and I'm drawn to organic materials. And for me, using those materials is another sort of, metaphor for my own, like, sort of like personal manifestations of, it's okay if it doesn't look seamless. Coming from working in TV, there's a lot of creative energy put into making some details very seamless or invisible.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, with my own work, I feel like I can take that energy to actually find more interesting ways to represent something on screen than to just work on trying to hide things.
Yeah.
And that's really where I want to put my energy. So before I start, designing for a film, my first step is to go to different art supply stores, fabric stores, paper stores. I love paper stores. There's a great one in Toronto, Paper Place.
Mm-hmm.
And touching, like, they recognize me. I'm like taking stuff out. I'm just like feeling it. And a lot of the times I'll be drawn to something and not know what I'm going to use it for, but just know that it sparks some sort of reaction in me, and I'll buy it. And at the end of the day, when I look at what I've got, there's a language already being formed around the pieces that I've just very intuitively chosen. And then from there, I can go forward with intention, reinvesting in those things that make me the most excited.
Mm-hmm. No, the conversation is flowing itself well, because my next interest, I guess, is the film that you co-directed, Clean Your Room, with Sophie Jarvis. Yes.
Yes.
And because, I mean, obviously it's clear that the animation style is an entirely different beast. If anything, it completely veers away from that tactile element.
Yeah.
So what was like the process, not only like in the transition of animation style, but even the melding of live action with it, like how was that for you?
It was great. It was amazing. Clean Your Room was a really interesting film because my friend Sophie and I, we're very good friends, very creatively aligned. But that was the first time we decided to see if we could actually work collaboratively, if our friendship would translate. It does. We're great collaborators. But that film also had an incredibly short timeline.
Mm-hmm.
And the funding that we received for it was really geared towards live action filmmaking and the speed at which that production moves. So when it came time to think of how are we bringing animation into this, you know, the answer was, well, we can't have any actual on-screen elements, because what takes the time in a animation schedule, other than the animating itself, is finishing, you know, a puppet or a prop or anything to a level of detail that is appropriate for a close-up to be shot at a really small scale. And if something breaks and you have to fix it, you also have to refinish it, and it takes a lot of time. So it was really like, how can we work smart with this, but how can we also align working really smart with our interests as well? And Sophie and I are both obsessed with shadow puppetry. It's another really fun kind of optical illusion that happens almost in real time, very similar to stop motion, you know? So it just seemed like a great way to tell that story, and it was really economical in our usage of our time and energy and the budget that we had. So I think it was just a great solution. It was really interesting and a lot of fun.
No, that's excellent. And I guess then my last question revolves specifically around sort of the current practices that you're in, and the where your curiosities lie in if you have the attempt to expanding that into something beyond what you think currently is capable.
Yeah, I'm at a really fortunate place in my career in which I am working with the film board, which is a really supportive partner to have in filmmaking, which enables me to have just a little bit of time outside of working on that film to think about other ideas. Because I'm sure lots of independent filmmakers know that when you go through grant funding, as I had for my other films, it is all encompassing, and it takes 26 hours out of a 24-hour day to accomplish what you need to do. So it's really been great to be able to do that. I'm really interested. There's a lot of worlds that I'm really interested in exploring through animation, through stop motion. And that's one of my favorite things about it, is that you can go anywhere with stop motion. You know, when I had this idea for Deady Freddy, it wasn't, can I do it? It's just, how do I do it? You know, it's, you truly can go anywhere, and you can personify inexplicable emotions or moods or tones. It's the ultimate art form for the ultimate control freak. You can really focus in on stuff. So that being said, you know, I'm working on another short film that I'm writing that more so has to do with the relative perception of time through different experience. And I'm also working on a concept that I'm hoping to turn into a TV show eventually, that about a geriatric utopia, basically, which has lots of themes about society, aging, technology. And that's something I'm really interested in, is moving into more of a multi-protagonist narrative storytelling. Old Man and Deady Freddy have one very clear main character, and that's great, and it helps me really focus in on things. But even just the way my mind works is constantly looking at things from different angles, and I want to be able to express that through my storytelling, through, you know, writing different protagonists to experience different facets of the same issues.
Mm-hmm. No, and I'm sure the translation of that into your, aesthetic sensibilities will give way to a very, very a spectrum of very interesting looking characters that all have, have their internalization expressed in magnificent ways. But no, thank you so much, Alicia.
Thanks,
It's great to have you at FOFS, and it's great to talk to you as well.